Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. I hope you're all having a fantastic Friday. I know I am. Sorry if I look a little disheveled. I was just replacing wiper blades on vehicles. So, you know, it's sometimes can be tricky. I still haven't figured out the back ones. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, today for our class, what we're going to do is we're going to be going over what March is. So, every month for I don't know if it's every country in the world, but in the U.S. at least, every month has kind of a theme. And last month we did Black History Month and kind of went over, I think we did a lot more for Martin Luther King's birthday. So MLK Day, but we went over some other things as well, just to really celebrate the importance of, all people in this country. So this one, though, is on at least, probably more, but at least 50% of the population, because March is Women's History Month. So, this is a day to celebrate the women in your life. And again, it crosses all bounds because, there's men, there's women, and there's people that are non-binary and things like that as well. That might not identify that way, but they also have people in their lives that do identify that way. And so it's a good way to celebrate, the strong women in our lives. And we have a lot to be thankful for: strong mothers, grandmothers, spouses, girlfriends, all sorts of people in our life that are tough. Teachers, the list goes on. Aunts, nieces, be impressed with the ones who might be younger than you, but are still coming up and doing amazing things. So, but what we're going to do is go over kind of a bit of the history of how Women's History Month came about. And then we'll go over some ways that we can celebrate this month in different ways that you can show appreciation. And we can all show appreciation for women during this month. So Women's History Month is an annual declared month that highlights the contribution of women to events in history and contemporary society. So throughout history, you have a lot of famous women, of course, just like Joan of Arc, Susan B. Anthony, but there's kind of a sordid history there. But, she did do a lot for women. There's like Jane Goodall. There's lots of amazing women that have done amazing things. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, amazing women out there that have done just fantastic things. And it is celebrated during March in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, corresponding with International Women's Day on March 8th. That's this coming Wednesday. Oh yeah, and it's even on my calendar here. It's also my mom's birthday. Interesting. And during October in Canada, corresponding with the celebration of Persons Day on October 18th. So the commemoration began in 1978 as Women History's Day in Sonoma County, California, of course. Because it's California, we're awesome. And was championed by Gerda Lerner and the National Women's History Alliance to be recognized as a national week in 1980 and then month 1987 in the United States, spreading internationally after that. So Women's History Week. So in the United States, Women's History Month traces its beginnings back to the first International Women's History Day in 1911. The holiday had been largely forgotten in the U.S. until the late 1960s, when an activist calling herself Laura X organized a march in Berkeley, California on International Women's Day, March 8th, 1969. Now, Laura X, I don't know if she goes by the X because the same reason that Malcolm X did, but a lot of times people's history, when they don't really believe that they know what their real last name was, because it was a name given to them as opposed to a name that they chose. And it could have come from a lot of the bad backgrounds, say, during enslavement, things like that. And a family did hold enslaved people on their properties, and people don't identify with that. People change their name to the X, and the X symbolizes in mathematics the unknown. And so that's why X is something where it's unknown. I don't really know what my history was. So that might be why she calls herself that. But anyway, she's the one who got it kicked off. And also the creation of the Women's History Research Center, a central archive of women's movement from 1968 to 1974. Laura X thought it unfair for half the human race to have only one day a year, and called for a National Women's History Month to be built and around International Women's Day. The Women's History Research Center collected nearly 1 million documents on microfilm and provided resources and records of the women's liberation movement that are now available through the National Women's History Alliance, which carried on their ideas, including successfully petitioning Congress to declare March as Women's History Month. In 1978, the school district of Sonoma, California participated in Women's History Week, an event designed around the week of March 8th, again, International Women's History Day. In 1979, a 15-day conference about women's history was held at Sarah Lawrence College from July 13th until July 29th. Wow, that's a lot of time to spend. And chaired by Gerda Lerner. It was co-sponsored by Sarah Lawrence College, the Women's Action Alliance, and the Smithsonian Institution. When its participants learned about the success of Sonoma County's Women's History Week celebration, they decided to initiate similar celebrations with their own organizations, communities, and school districts. They also agreed to support an effort to secure National Women's History Week. And then, moving forward, in February 1980, the last year of President Jimmy Carter's presidency, but Jimmy Carter issued a presidential proclamation declaring the week of March 8, 1980 as National Women's History Week. The proclamation stated, "From the first settlers who came to our shores, from the first American Indian families who befriended them, men and women have worked together to build this nation. Too often the women were unsung, and sometimes their contributions went unnoticed. But the achievements, leadership, courage, strength, and love of the women who built America was as vital as that of men whose names we know so well." As Dr. Gerda Lerner has noted, women's history is women's right. It is an essential and indispensable heritage from which we can draw pride, comfort, courage, and long-range vision. I ask my fellow Americans to recognize this heritage with appropriate activities during National Women's History Week, which is March 2nd. Well, that's always this year, from March 2nd to the 8th, 1980. I urge libraries, schools, and community organizations to focus their observances on the leaders who struggled for equality. Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, Lucy Stone, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Harriet Tubman, and Alice Paul. Understanding the true history of our country will help us to comprehend the need for full equality under the law of all our people. This goal can be achieved by ratifying the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which states that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex or sexual orientation. Carter was referring to the Equal Rights Amendment, which was never ratified, not to the amendment which did become the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution after his presidency. So in 1981, responding to the growing popularity of Women's History Week, Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican in Utah. It's kind of crazy. This is about women's history, not about that guy. Anyway, I could tell you stories. And Republican Barbara Mikulski, a Democrat from Maryland, co-sponsored the first joint constitution proclaiming a Women's History Week. Congress passed a resolution which authorized and requested the president to proclaim the the week beginning March 7th, 1982, Women's History Week. Throughout the next several years, Congress continued to pass joint resolutions designated a week in March as Women's History Week. Schools across the country also began to have their own local celebrations of Women's History Week and even Women's History Month. By 1986, 14 states had declared March as Women's History Month. So now let's get into that. So how did it go from a day kind of to a week, and how did it move into a month? Well, there's only one way to find out, by listening up. So in 1987, after being petitioned by the National Women's History Project, Congress passed Pub L 191. Anyway, I'm not going to read those anymore because you can look them up if you want, but which designated the month of March 1987 as Women's History Month. Between 1988 and 1994, Congress passed additional resolutions requesting and authorizing the president to proclaim March of each year as Women's History Month. Since 1988, U.S. presidents have issued annual proclamations designating the month of March as Women's History Month on occasion. State departments of education also began to encourage celebrations of Women's History Month as a way to promote equality among the sexes in the classroom. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Alaska, New York, Oregon, and other states developed and distributed curriculum materials in all of their public schools, which prompted educational events such as essay contests. Within a few years, thousands of schools and communities began to celebrate Women's History Month. They planned engaging and stimulating programs about women's roles in history and society, with support and encouragement from governors, city councils, school boards, and the U.S. Congress. So then in March 2011, think about this. So this goes back to Women's History Day had been around for a while. It wasn't Women's History Week until 1969. Then it wasn't until the late 80s that they really started the push for, and early 90s to push for a month to be designated. So now we come to all the way to March 2011. So 1960, basically 42 years. But in March 2011, the Obama administration released a report, Women in America, Indicators of Social and Economic Well-Being, showing women's status in the U.S. in 2011 and how it changed over time. This report was the first comprehensive federal report on women since the report produced by the Commission on the Status of Women. Some organizations have issued statements making Women's History Month. For example, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, sort of the RNC and the DNC. So our President's Commission on the Celebration of Women's History in America recently sponsored hearings in many parts of the country. The Women's Progress Commission will soon conduct hearings to promote interest in preserving areas that are relevant in American women's history. Some of the groups promoting this interest are state historical sites, women's organizations, and groups such as the Girl Scouts of the United States. Yeah, so 1988 basically is when the Women's History Month really started. And it's been going on till now. And even in Canada, Women's History Month was proclaimed in Canada in 1992, where its purpose to give Canadians an opportunity to learn about the important contributions of women and girls to our society and the quality of our lives today. October was chosen to coincide with the celebration of the anniversary on October 18th on the decision of the court case Edwards versus Canada, more commonly known as the Persons case, in which it was established that Canadian women were eligible to be appointed senators and in general had the same rights as Canadian men with respect to positions of political power. Well, I thought Canada was a little more progressive than that. And it took so long for women to be able to even hold office. In Russia, since 2017, there is a group of female volunteers who spend a virtual month of Women's History Month. In the Ukraine, the Gender Museum hosts events in honors of Women's History Month in Ukraine. So it's not just the US, but ours has been around for a little bit longer in recognizing, but it's really good that it's something that's catching on. Hungary even. Okay, well, interesting. So that is the history of it. Now quickly, let's go over, I'm going to pause it for a second, but let's go over ways that we can celebrate women in women's history. Uno momento. Okay, so we're back. So just as a reminder too, we have to keep in mind that the reason it's so important that we celebrate women's history, and a lot of people have asked, like, well, why isn't there like a men's history month? Well, that's because every month is. I mean, we study about men all the time. There's birthdays, celebrations, presidents, because we haven't had a woman president. So there's all sorts. So just a month isn't really enough, but it is something that we do. And women still get paid far less than men for doing the same job as a man. Teaching, there's dividends that are given out to men basically based on the fact that that's their gender is a man when it comes to teaching. It's really difficult for a woman to become tenured at a college compared to a man. So, and it's just based on the fact that somebody was born a woman, somebody was born a man. So this is why it's very important for us to celebrate and recognize these things. So here are some ways to recognize Women's History Month. There's 36 of them. I'll get through some. So watch a documentary about women's rights. There are a lot of, you can look at, or even how women have participated. I can't remember the name of the movie, but there's a movie that's basically a documentary on the space race and how women were integral in doing the math in order to get all that accomplished. So, I can't remember the name of it right now. And some of them are, you can do 9 to 5, the story movement, feminists, what were they thinking? Reversing Roe, the changes of everything, period, end of sentence. The Janes on HBO, A Secret Love, Audrey and Daisy, she's beautiful when she's angry. And a lot of these are on Peacock, Amazon Prime, Netflix, HBO, mostly Netflix though. Read a book about women's rights. There's plenty of them. A Room of One's Own, really good, Virginia Woolf. Untamed, Whipping Girl, a transsexual woman on sexism and the scapegoating of femininity. So a lot of books out there that you can read on this too. Add some podcasts to your queue. I don't know if any of you are podcasters. I'm not really. I'd rather go to a class than listen to a podcast, but there are some. When I go on long car trips and I don't want to listen to music anymore, sometimes a podcast is nice. But there's The Cut, Woman's Hour, Hysteria, Encyclopedia Womanica. Good plain word. There are TED Talks by women leaders. Learn some Women's History Month stories. Yeah, find out. What's her name? The Learner. Learn about her. There's a lot that you can do. Learn more about the history of women's health. If you look at things such as, gynecology, obstetrics, mammograms, there's a lot that goes in breast cancer. There's so many things that actually go into that women have to deal with simply because they can give birth. There's a lot more medical complications. So that is an important thing to really keep in mind and understand that it's something that a man will never know. And in our group, it's all men. Take a virtual museum tour. Explore the Library of Congress. Read good news about women. Take action. I went to the parade, the Women's March, and everybody had their pink hats. There's another name for it. I won't say it right now. But it was beautiful. There were just tons of women. I went there with my wife and her mom, and it was wonderful to celebrate that and really march alongside strong women, because at the time we had somebody in office that thought it was okay to just grab women wherever they wanted and say that they liked it. It's disgusting. Donate to organizations that in your community that support women and girls. The Girl Scouts of America, or of the U.S. Girls Who Code, National Women's Law Center. There's tons. Fight for reproductive freedom. Roe v. Wade just got overturned, so women don't have the right to choose whether or not they can have a baby. And it's really the woman's choice. It is not anybody else's choice. It's her body, and she has to go through everything. So, it's a huge debate, I understand, but really look at all the sides of it. And that's why the TED Talks and certain podcasts and things like that are important to look at. And the thing is that no matter what, people are going to go get it anyway. They can either get it done safely in a hospital, or what used to happen before Roe v. Wade, and go to alleyways and have it done, and then they both die, that child as well as the woman, because sometimes they're not ready. Sometimes people are raped or molested and then forced to have a baby. I mean, there's so many things. So, we have to be very careful with it. Do your part to change policy. Prevent gender-based violence by taking a bystander intervention training. I'll look into that if you guys are interested, but let me know. But there's lots of things, and that's what this is showing. I don't want to go too far into it, but please celebrate this month. Do something simple. Give your mom a hug. Say, Happy National Women's Month, Mom. I love you. Reach out to some of your friends. Try to stand up for any women that you might see that are friends of yours that might be being bullied or made fun of, and stand up for them. I mean, we should do that anyway. It doesn't have to be because of this month, but it is something to recognize, because sometimes this is what it takes for people to really start to see how we should act every day of the year, not just because it's a month. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Hope you learned a lot from this. And I will see you all later on. Ciao for now.